The Forbidden Tale, a comprehensive study on lesbian, gay, bisexuals, LGB in Iran. Chapter 3 Analyses on religion and mental disorder patterns. Contents: the psychological implications of sexual orientation on adolescent social life. LGBT and the family. LGBT and cyberbullying. Analyses on religion and mental disorder patterns. Religion Iranians' perspective. Iranians LGB and asylum. The psychological implications of sexual orientation on adolescent social life. Adolescence, usually the years between ages 13 and 19, is the transitional journey from childhood to adulthood that can at times be a period of increased risk-taking, disorientation, and discovery. This transitional journey is often fraught with issues of independence and self-identity. Many adolescents face difficult choices regarding drugs, alcohol, and sexuality. Peer groups, romantic interests, and appearance tend to take on heightened importance. In general, LGBT youths share many of the same coming of developmental stages as their heterosexual peers. Adolescence is also a period marked by defining a personal identity. One's sexual orientation typically emerges between the period of middle childhood and early adolescence and without any prior sexual experience. For many LGB youths, adolescence can be simply hellish as they first become aware of and recognize their own sexual and emotional attraction to members of their own gender, which often results in feeling of shame. In fact, shame and pride are powerful emotions that have been historically linked to nonconformist sexual identities. For some, shame is simply the first and remains a permanent, structuring fact of identity. Mount 2000 argues that for the homosexual subject, the increasing consciousness of same-sex desire generates feelings of marginality. An individual may feel ashamed of his or her feelings, or may replace shame with the feeling of pride. What has been proposed by such theorists is that the LGBT identity, however it is formed through the shame and pride binary. Sadly, recognizing one's LGBT identity at this most vulnerable period can have hazardous consequences on one's mental and physical health. For young, struggling LGB people, the road to acceptance is arduous as the journey into adulthood becomes more complicated and uncertain. As homophobia works by punishing and attacking on a personal individual level, this pushes young, struggling LGB people to maintain a false heterosexual enigma because their sexual desire or gender has been labeled abnormal, dirty, and disgusting. Homophobia plausibly contributes to young people having feelings of self-loathe about their own sexuality and may cause them to have a low self-esteem. These emotions can in turn trigger self-destructive cycles of behavior such as drinking, drug consumption, unsafe sexual practices, and self-harm. This vulnerable period in their lives is often tempered by the fact that many LGB youths receive little support from either their family and/or social institutions. Adolescents experiencing same-sex attraction are increasingly uncomfortable identifying themselves as LGB. The complexities of an approach to same-sex issues with adults multiply when the client is an adolescent. Accumulating evidence indicates that adolescents who have had same-sex sexual attractions, who have had sexual or romantic relationships with persons of the same sex, or who identify as LGB are more likely than heterosexual adolescents to experience symptoms of depression, suicidal thoughts, and may even try to commit suicide. Today's LGBT youths in the Western developed world are more likely to be victimized because they are more visible. In comparison, in most of the developing countries and/or non-Western world, LGBT youths are invisible. Although invisibility might mean less victimization, it does not mean free of stresses. Members in an invisible stigmatized groups are required to have careful monitoring of all interactions and awareness that relationships are based on a light that could be exposed at any time. Their stress is exacerbated by the potential rejection from family as well as from society, especially as there are less existing supportive community or professional services to help LGBT youth in developing countries to deal with these rejections. The stresses from rejection and masking one's real sexual identity can often result in poor physical and mental health. LGB and the family. For many LGB youths, their relationship with their families is often painful. Initial parental reactions to the disclosure of LGB identity are mostly negative, sometimes including ejection from the home. Thus, gay adolescents are susceptible to loneliness, isolation, depression, and suicide. Although family relationships are understood to be a primary context of adolescent development, only a small number of studies have focused on the role of parent-adolescent relationships for LGB youth and young adults. The literature addressing the family relationships for transgender adolescents and young people is lacking. Parents and many providers have limited information about sexual orientation and gender identity development in children and adolescents. Given that family support is perhaps the major influence on an adolescent's self-esteem and the crucial role of parents in promoting adolescent well-being, it is surprising that sparse attention has focused on the parenting of LGBT adolescents. Nonetheless, it is not easy for the family to accept the non-traditional sexual orientation of the LGB adolescents. In many cultures, homosexuality can bring shame upon the person and his or her entire family, with consequences for friends and family members. For example, female relatives cannot marry due to the lack of willing suitors. Male relatives may be fired from their jobs, and the social standing of the entire family can be compromised. As a result, honor killings of homosexual family members can occur in an attempt to restore honor to the family in many areas of Middle East. Cumulative knowledge suggests both family and religious support contributes to boosting self-esteem, whilst lack of such support contributes to a low self-esteem. Many parents may not believe their children when they come out, and instead genuinely believe they are going through a phase or that being gay is due to outside influences. Sometimes gay youths simultaneously receive overt and covert messages of worthlessness from their family. For example, parents will often detach themselves emotionally from their gay child early in childhood when they recognize that their child is different, particularly if non-gender conforming issues arise. Reports from researchers who have studied family reactions to their children's LGB identity indicate that parental acceptance and rejection are different constructs. Thus, accepting and rejecting behaviors can co-occur as families adjust to learning about their child's LGBT identity. In startling contrast, affirmation or acceptance of LGBT adolescents is associated with a positive adjustment, increased self-esteem, increased social support, better overall health status, decreased mental health and behavioral health risks, sexual risk behavior, suicidal thoughts, and substance abuse. With diminished parental bonding, LGB adolescents often withdraw from society or commence risky endeavors that can often lead to self-destructive behaviors such as substance abuse to aid in the coming out process and to alleviate the anxiety or depression associated with concealing their identity and facing rejection from family and friends. As far back as 1982, it was hypothesized that homosexuals use substances to dull the pain of feeling different and alone, to reduce sexual inhibitions relating to internalized homophobia, and to reduce the stress of the competition for good-looking sexual partners culture. 1982. Researchers in one study examined substance use amongst LGB youths and asked their subjects whether they perceived reactions to their LGB identity from a range of people, including family members, coaches, teachers, therapists, neighbors, and friends, to be acceptance, neutral, or rejection. Although reactions of acceptance did not directly reduce substance use, such reactions buffered the link between rejections and substance use. Another recent study assessed the relationship between family rejection in adolescents and the health of LGB young adults. That study showed a clear association between parental behaviors of rejection during adolescence and the use of illegal drugs, feeling of depression, attempted suicide, and sexual health risk by LGB young adults. Facing this external view of the self, it is a small wonder that the external homosexual person internalizes this hatred and has difficulty with accepting his or her identity, building self-esteem, and expressing sexuality. Numerous bodies of research demonstrate that LGB youths have high levels of emotional distress. About 65% of all homosexuals who seek therapy state that depression as a reason, which is often a result of adjusting to their homosexuality. And within this percentage, 50% started therapy between the ages of 18 to 21. Whilst studies have documented that LGBT youth suffer more emotional distress than heterosexual, non-transgendered youth, the reasons for their elevated risk are often not explicitly studied or stated. A growing body of research supports the theory that negative experiences resulting from LGBT stigma leads to chronic stress that contributes to emotional distress amongst LGBT adolescents and adults, indicating the meditating role of being treated badly. It is possible that LGBT adolescents have less social support, fewer resources to cope with victimization experiences, or that their victimization experiences are more severe. Recent North American and New Zealand studies of large populations reveal that young LGBT people have higher suicide attempt rates, at least 4 times higher in comparison to their heterosexual counterparts. About 7% of the respondents reported that they have experienced discrimination because someone thought they were gay, lesbian, or bisexual. There were no notable differences in rates of perceived discrimination by age, race, or sex. Amongst both males and females, LGBT youth displayed more emotional distress as compared to heterosexual, non-transgendered youth, as evidenced by significantly higher rates of suicidal thoughts and self-harm. The prevalence of self-harm was particularly high amongst LGBT males. LGBT youth also had significantly higher depressive symptomology sources than heterosexual, non-transgendered. The difficulties some young LGBT people encounter in the process of becoming adults include, but not limited to, homelessness, homophobic bullying at school, family rejection, and difficulties finding safe space to form supportive relationships. Data from the 2007 Washington, D.C. Youth Risk Behavior Surveillance (YRBS) system showed that 40% of youths has reported a minority sexual orientation indicated feelings of sadness or hopelessness within the previous 2 weeks of the study, compared to 26% of heterosexual youths. This data showed that LGB youths were more than twice as likely as heterosexual youths to have considered attempting suicide in the past year. 31% versus 14%. One plausible explanation for this elevated risk of emotional distress amongst adolescents with a minority sexual orientation or transgendered identity is that these youths are dealing with distresses related to having a stigmatized identity. LGBT adolescents live in social environments in which they may be exposed to negative experiences, including social rejection and isolation, diminished social support, discrimination, and verbal and physical abuse. Often the school environment becomes a place of sexual orientation violence, SOV, a term coined by Dear Jelly. By the end of the elementary school, LGBT youths receive the message that heterosexuality is natural and correct and homosexuality is bad. Not conforming to gender role stereotypes is unacceptable, especially for boys. For those youths who consider themselves LGB, moving into adolescence with increased hormone productivity that is a normal part of the period of sexual maturation often means their puberty passage is marked by being bullied because of their non-conformity to gender norms. LGB youths frequently deal with bullying in the form of harassment, violence, and attacks. Studies have shown that LGB students constantly received bigoted verbal abuse in the form of pejorative labeling such as homo, fag, or sissy more than 2,000 times per day. Literature shows that appearance is the #1 reason for bullying. The second most common reason was actual or assumed sexual orientation and gender identity. A study undertaken by the school's health education unit for campaign group Stonewall revealed that almost 2/3 of homosexual pupils in Britain's schools have suffered homophobic bullying. Even more alarming was that the study revealed a shocking picture of the context of homophobic bullying undertaken by fellow pupils and school staff. Almost all of those had experienced verbal bullying, 41% have been physically attacked, whilst 17% have been received death threats. Even if LGB individuals did not directly experience bullying, they were still in an environment where homophobic language and comments are commonplace. LGBT and cyberbullying. GLSEN has found that LGBT youths spend more time online than youths in general. LGBT youths make friends online and use the internet to gather information about sexuality and health, including information about HIV and AIDS. LGBT youths are twice as likely to participate in political activities as other youths, also making these connections online. Because LGBT youth spend more time online, they are more likely the targets of cyberbullying. Cyberbullying are attacks that include electronic distribution of humiliating photos, dissemination of false or private information, targeting youth in cruel online polls, and other types of online harassment. It consists of using the internet and other related technologies to harm other people in a deliberate, repeated, and hostile manner. Cyberbullying gives bullies the protection of anonymity. On one hand, as technology has become an intrinsic part of our everyday lives and has become more accessible, it allowed the LGBT community to interact within itself globally and to give the world a better understanding of LGBT issues. On the other hand, this digital territory has transformed into other venue to display hate crimes against LGBT youth. It is reported that expression of hatred towards minority groups is more serious within the online community than it is with the offline community. Cyberbullying combined with bullying lowers self-esteem, which affects on mental health and lifestyle. An Iowa State survey of 444 youths revealed that 1 in 2 LGBT youths report being cyberbullied about their sexual identities. More than half report being afraid to tell their parents about being bullied because their parents might restrict online access, which, ironically, is often the lifeline to the outside world for many young LGBT students who have been ostracized by their peers at school. Moreover, 40% of the respondents say that their parents would not believe they were being cyberbullied. 55% report that their parents could not do anything to stop it, and 57% said that they did not think a school official could help. Amongst the LGBT respondents, 45% report feeling depressed because of being bullied, 38% embarrassed, and 28% anxious about simply going to school. 1 in 4 reported mentioned suicidal thoughts. Another survey showed that young adults who identified as LGBT had a whopping 52% chance of being bullied in the previous year compared to their heterosexual peers who had a 38% chance. Clearly, LGB and all those who identify as being a sexual minority are more likely to experience being bullied both in early adulthood and during compulsory secondary schooling with the use of the internet as the main vehicle. Schools, potentially one of the most dangerous places for LGBT youth, must change homophobic behaviors at all levels to encourage an understanding of alternative lifestyles and sexualities. Anti-bullying interventions calls for policymakers, employers, further educational institutions, and others working with young adults to help address sexual orientation inequality by challenging discrimination at all ages. It should not be limited to schools. analyzes on religion and mental disorder patterns. Religion. Religion adds another layer of pressure and continues to be a crucial factor in opposition to societal acceptance of homosexuality and same-sex marriage. What determines the types of orientations are not one person's mere inclination, but a falsely understood religion and continuously impacted by powerful socio-religious sources. It is noteworthy that a family's religious affiliation, although linked to lower family acceptance, was positively associated with young adult LGBT social support. Views on the relationship between religions and various versions of sexual orientation have diverged amongst time and place, within organized religions and between different religions and denominations. Attitudes toward homosexuality have been found to be determined not only by personal religious beliefs, but by the interactions of those beliefs with the predominant national religious context, even for people who are less religious or who do not share their local dominant religious context. Generally, the present-day religious doctrines of the world's major religions enormously vary on attitudes toward LGB. In Islam, there is only one incomparable God, Allah, and that Muhammad, PBUH, is the messenger of God. It is the world's second largest religion and the fastest growing major religion in the world, with over 1.8 billion followers, or 24.1% of the global population, who are known as Muslims. Muslims make up the majority of the population in 49 countries. All major Islamic schools disapprove of homosexuality and view same-sex desires as an unnatural temptation. Sexual relations are seen as a transgression of the natural rule and aim of sexual activity. In Judaism, the Torah, first 5 books of the Hebrew Bible, states that a man shall not lie with another man as he would with a woman. It is an abomination. Christian denominations hold a variety of views on the issue of homosexual activity, ranging from outright condemnation to complete acceptance. Most Christian denominations welcome people who are attracted to the same sex, but still teach that homosexual acts are sinful. The Roman Catholic Church, the Eastern Orthodox Church, and other mainline denominations such as the Reformed Church in America and the American Baptist Church view homosexuality as a sin. All 3 major religions take a variety of approaches of condemnation, ranging from quietly discouraging homosexual activity, explicitly forbidding same-sex sexual practices amongst adherents, to actively and vocally opposing social acceptance of homosexuality to execution. Religious belief seems to be a crucial factor in terms of sexual orientation. A study revealed that amongst those who attend religious services weekly or more, there continues to be a slightly more opposition to societal acceptance of homosexuality. When the nearly 1/3 of Americans who say homosexuality should be discouraged are asked why they feel this way, by far the most common reason given, by 52%, is that homosexuality conflicts with their religious or moral beliefs. This is equally supported by data suggesting the widely held belief that the more religiously devout harbored, the most vehement homophobia. However, some liberal Christians are supportive of homosexuals. In particular, the Metropolitan Community Church, a denomination of 40,000 members, was founded specifically to serve the Christian LGBT community and is devoted to being open and affirming to LGBT individuals. Within the Anglican community, there are openly gay clergy, Gene Robinson and Mary Glasspool, who are openly homosexual bishops in the U.S. Episcopal Church, and Eva Brun in Lutheran Church of Sweden. In 2005, the Reverend Rob Schenck, a prominent Washington, D.C. evangelical leader, told a large gathering of young evangelicals that he believes homosexuality is not a choice, but rather a predisposition, something deeply rooted in people. Although he supported opposition to homosexuality, he did voice, "If it's inevitable that the scientific evidence is coming, we have to be prepared with a loving response." However, the situation is changing on ground and there are visible paradigm shifts which help LGBT people to live in peace. The number of supportive religions is continuously increasing around the world as the developed world enacts laws supporting LGBT rights. Under the leadership of Pope Francis, the Catholic Church is also evolving on LGBT issues. In the summer of 2014, the popular Pope Francis said, "If someone is gay and searches for the Lord and is willing to do well, then who am I to judge him?" This sent shockwaves throughout the Catholic Church and the world, as his position stood in contrast to that of his predecessor, Pope Benedict XVI, who suggested that gay marriage was a threat to global peace. His statement jump-started a remarkable period in which several high-ranking Catholics, motivated by Pope Francis's more open posture, made comments of a similar vein. In May, a top-ranking Italian bishop said that the Church should listen to same-sex marriage arguments. A few weeks later, Brazilian Cardinal Claudio Holmes said he did not know whether Jesus would oppose gay marriage. In early September, New York Cardinal Timothy Dolan approved the St. Patrick's Day Parade Committee's decision to allow a gay group to march in the 2015 parade under their own banner. 21 years earlier, one of Dolan's predecessors, Cardinal John O'Connor, said that to allow a gay group to march would be a slander to the Apostles' Creed. These modern-day religious postulates are in line with the Commission on Human Rights statement that international standards require that there be concerted state policy to eradicate practices, even if the proponents argued that they have their roots in religious beliefs and rituals. Mental disorder patterns and LGBT. Historical overview of sexuality concentrates primarily on male homosexuality within Western culture and suggests society's attitude toward homosexuality has been in conflict across the ages. Various theories of homosexuality are derived from either an essentialist approach or a social constructionist approach. The evolution of status of homosexuality in mental disorder classifications persuasively suggests that notions of mental disorder can rapidly evolve when social constructs and society evolves. Historically, the medical community was one of the most powerful anti-gay social forces, taking an early stance that gays were in fact mentally ill and in need of treatment. Modern attitudes toward homosexuality have religious, legal, and medical underpinnings. Before the High Middle Ages, homosexual acts appear to have been tolerated or ignored by the Christian churches throughout Europe. Beginning in the latter half of the 12th century, however, hostility toward homosexuality began to take root and eventually diffused throughout European religious and secular institutions. Condemnation of homosexual acts and other non-procreative sexual behavior labeled as unnatural, which received official expression in the writings of Thomas Aquinas and others, became widespread and has continued throughout the present day. By the end of the 19th century, medicine and psychiatry were effectively competing with the religion and the legal system for jurisdiction over sexuality. Consequently, homosexual discourse expanded from the realms of sin and crime to the realms of mental pathology. This historical shift was generally considered progressive because a sick person was less blameful than a sinner or criminal. Homosexuality became defined as a perversion in which individuals suffer from primitive object relations, impaired ego function, and a defective superego. However, even within the medicine and psychiatric circles, there were divergent views. Homosexuality was not universally viewed as pathological. One of the first to write a text on sexual pathology with a special emphasis on male homosexuality was by Richard von Krafft-Ebing, an Austro-German psychiatrist and author of the 1886 foundational text work, Psychopathic Sexualize. He described homosexuality as a degenerative sickness. However, Sigmund Freud and Havelock Ellis both adopted more accepting stances. Early in the 20th century, Ellis argued that homosexuality was inborn, not immortal, that it was not a disease, and that many homosexuals made outstanding contributions to society. Freud agreed with Ellis that a homosexual orientation should not be viewed as a form of pathology. In a now famous letter to an American mother in 1935, Freud wrote, "Homosexuality is assuredly no advantage, but it is nothing to be ashamed of. No vice, no degradation. It cannot be classified as an illness. We consider it to be a variation of sexual function produced by a certain arrest of sexual development. Many highly respectable individuals of ancient and modern times have been homosexuals. Several of the greatest men among them, Plato, Michelangelo, Leonardo da Vinci, etc. It is a great injustice to persecute homosexuality as a crime, and cruelty too. Nevertheless, Sigmund Freud's basic theory of human sexuality was different from that of Ellis. He believed all human beings were initially bisexual and that they become heterosexual or homosexual as a result of their experiences with parents and others. In 1957, Evelyn Hooker's research was instrumental in the removal of homosexuality as a mental disorder from the DSM. Her study was innovative in several important respects. First, rather than simply accepting the predominant view of homosexuality as pathology, she posed the question of whether homosexuals and heterosexuals differed in their psychological adjustment. Second, rather than studying psychiatric patients, she recruited a sample of homosexual men who were functioning normally in society. In other words, she pioneered a study where she contrasted an experimental group of homosexuals with a heterosexual control matched on age, IQ, education, and on a battery of psychological tests. She then asked a panel of expert psychologists to rate the psychological health and predict who was gay versus straight. The adjustment ratings showed no significant differences. If anything, the gay men did better. Indeed, the experts in psychoanalysis could not distinguish between the interpreted responses of participants from these two groups on 3 different projective tests, which indicated no significant differences in mental health between the groups. Although it took time for views to shift, the studies caused a stir in the dialogue surrounding human sexual activity in the psychological community and are often seen as a starting point for contemporary understandings of sexual orientation. Still, in 1968, DSM-2, the APA's Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Classification of Mental Disorders, reinstated homosexuality as a mental disorder, following a long tradition in medicine and psychiatry, which in the 19th century appropriated homosexuality from the church, transforming it from sin to mental disorder. Until the early 1970s, the American Psychiatric Association, APA, retained the classification of homosexuality as a disease based on Freudian concepts of arrested sexual development that leads to a loveless life. The classification was referred to as ego-dystonic homosexuality or negative homosexual identity, characterized by guilt, shame, anxiety, and depression. The age of onset was thought to be adolescence, and one of the predisposing factors was the presence of antisocial attitudes. In December 1973, bowing under the weight of empirical data, coupled with changing social norms and the development of a politically active gay community in the United States, the board of directors of the APA halted the classification of homosexuality as a mental illness by removing it from the DSM. The APA asked all members attending its convention to vote on whether they believed homosexuality to be a mental disorder. 5,854 psychiatrists voted to remove homosexuality from the DSM and 3,810 to retain it. However, although the APA removed homosexuality from the DSM, it was replaced with sexual orientation disturbance for people in conflict with their sexual orientation. Not until 1987 did homosexuality completely fall out of the DSM. Following suit, in 1992, the World Health Organization, WHO, removed homosexuality from its ICD classification with the publication of ICD-10, although ICD-10 still carries the construct of ego-dystonic sexual orientation. In this condition, the person is not in doubt about his or her sexual preference, but wishes it to be different because of associated psychological and behavioral disorders. Zoologist and taxonomist Alfred C. Kinsey and his colleague Hooker began to utilize empirical research as a foundation for the present-day knowledge about sexuality that others followed in debunking the myth that homosexuality was a mental illness. Kinsey, in his groundbreaking empirical studies of sexual behavior amongst American adults, revealed a significant number of his research participants reported having engaged in homosexual behavior to the point of orgasm after age 16. Furthermore, Kinsey and his colleagues reported that 10% of the males in their sample and 2 to 6% of the females, depending on material status, had been more or less exclusively homosexual in their behavior for at least 3 years between the ages of 16 and 55. Kinsey's empirical findings and conclusions provided some assistance in the movement to have homosexuality eliminated as a psychiatric disorder. Throughout the years of debate on whether homosexuality is a mental disorder, different types of cures based on psychological or spiritual interventions cropped up to try to change an individual's sexual orientation, even when there is virtually no reliable evidence that sexuality can be controlled or changed. In the 1950s and 1960s, some therapists employed aversion therapy to cure male homosexuality. This typically involved showing patients pictures of naked men whilst giving them electric shocks or drugs to make the patient vomit. Once they could no longer bear it, the patient was shown pictures of naked women or sent out on a date with a young nurse. A main organization that advocates the scholar forms of conversion therapy is the National Association for Research and Therapy of Homosexuality, NARTH, which often partners with religious groups. NARTH believe they can heal or cure homosexuality through conversion therapy or other methods to change sexual orientation. Needless to say, these shockingly cruel and degrading methods have proven entirely ineffective. Another method used to cure homosexuality was reparative therapy. Reparative therapy tried to magically transform homosexuals into heterosexuals. According to a review by Drescher, 1998, current-day reparative therapists draw from pastoral counseling, having abandoned the neutrality psychoanalysis. Reparative therapy is based on conformity to traditional values and idealization of heterosexuality. Supporters of this school of thought file affidavits in support of anti-gay amendments and believe that their homosexual clients must be ostracized in order to be cured of homosexuality. In spite of the declassification of homosexuality as an illness, and this declassification is slowly happening around the world, some therapists continue to treat it as one. Medical services are often used to force a change to heterosexuality. These medical interventions range from institutionalization, aversion therapy, and chemical castration. Indigenous medicine are also used to attempt to change sexual orientation. Najmabadi explains, for legal and medical authorities, sex change surgeries are explicitly framed as the cure for a diseased abnormality, and on occasion, they are proposed as a religiously and legally sanctioned option for heteronormalizing people with same-sex desires or practices. One area in which this can be seen is military service. Obligatory service in the military opens many doors for Iranian men, especially with the possession of a document card. Upon completion of service, men are given a card that grants them many privileges, including the ability to qualify for a passport, officially buy or sell goods, participate in public sector activities, and gain governmental employment. In 2010, the Office for the Socially Harmed at the Welfare Organization of Iran responded to a strategic lobbying and activism by trans-identified individuals to reclassify their exemption from the military from Mental Disorder Clause, Section 33.8, to the Glandular Disorder Clause, Section 30. This has, in theory, reduced the amount of discrimination trans-identified men receive when seeking employment as a more socially permissible exemption, as it is clearly displayed on their identification. Gay-identified men and MSM, however, must still abide by the Mental Disorder Clause, which categorizes them as moral and sexual deviants. For them, a card is stamped with the words sexual deviant or behavioral disorder as a red exemption, stigmatizing labels that render the person virtually unemployable. Some psychologists and psychiatrists still hold negative personal attitudes toward homosexuality. However, empirical evidence and professional norms do not support the idea that homosexuality is a form of mental illness or is inherently linked to psychopathology. Indeed, Given the stresses created by sexual stigma and prejudice, it would be surprising if some of them did not manifest psychological problems. Pedophilia. Often mainstream society makes the erroneous conclusion that there is a link between homosexuality and pedophilia, therefore justifying the discrimination and violence LGB individuals face. Members of LGBT community are often stereotyped as representing a danger to the majority's most vulnerable members, children. Some people fear exposing their children to homosexuals in unsupervised settings because they believe the children might be molested, raped, or recruited to be homosexuals themselves. As discussed above, sexual orientation is not a mental illness, nor it is inherently associated with impaired psychological functioning. On the other hand, the American Psychiatric Association, APA, has included pedophiliac in its Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, DSM, since 1968. However, in a move towards destigmatizing pedophilia, the APA in its updated DSM distinguishes between pedophiles who desire sex with children and those who act upon those desires. The former, who want to have sex with children but whose desires are not distressing or harmful to themselves or others, is no longer classified as having a psychiatric condition in the updated DSM. What was once known as pedophilia is now called pedophiliac disorder. Research psychologist and noted authority on pedophiles Gregory Herrick defines pedophilia as a psychosexual disorder characterized by a preference for prepubescent children as sexual partners which may or may not be acted upon. He points out that not all pedophiles actually molest children. A pedophile may be attracted to children but never actually engage in sexual contact with them. Quite often, pedophiles never develop a sexual orientation towards other adults. They usually do not identify as homosexual. The majority identify as heterosexual, even those who abuse children of the same gender. They are sexually aroused by extreme youth, not by gender. Research clearly demonstrates heterosexual men comprise the vast majority of known pedophiles. There is no inherent connection between an adult's sexual orientation and her or his propensity for endangering others. There is no data, for example, showing that LGB individuals are more likely than heterosexual men and women to sexually harass their subordinates in the workplace, more likely than heterosexuals to possess any psychological characteristics that would make them less capable of controlling their sexual urges, refrain from the abuse of power, obey rules and laws, interact effectively with others, and less likely to exercise good judgment in handling authority. Herrick writes that it is socially aversion to male homosexuality and the attempts by some to represent gay men as a danger to the family. Similarly, studies by Dr. Carol Jenny, Dr. A.W. and Richard Snipe and others have not found evidence that LGB individuals are more likely to molest children than heterosexuals. Interestingly, Anna C. Salter writes in Predators, Pedophiles, Rapists, and Other Sex Offenders that when a man molests little girls, we call him a pedophile and not a heterosexual. Of course, when a man molests little boys, people automatically assume the perpetrator is a homosexual. Certainly, the publicity surrounding the Roman Catholic sex abuse cases has contributed and heightened these concerns. The mainstream view amongst researchers and professionals who work in the area of child sexual abuse is that homosexual and bisexual men do not pose any special threat to children. Another noted authority on this topic is Nicholas Groth. In an influential 1982 study, he wrote, "Are homosexual adults in general sexually attracted to children? And are pre-adolescent children at greater risk of molestation from homosexual adults than from heterosexual adults? There is no reason to believe so." The research to date all points to there being no significant relationship between homosexual lifestyle and child molestation. There appears to be practically no reportage of sexual molestation of girls by lesbian adults, and the adult male who sexually molests young boys is not likely to be homosexual. In the same vein, in 1998, Dr. Nathaniel McConaughey similarly cautioned against confusing homosexuality with pedophilia. He noted, "The man who offends against prepubertal or postpubertal boys is typically not sexually interested in older men or in women." Whilst the empirical research shows that sexual orientation does not affect the likelihood that people will abuse children, many heterosexuals still believe that homosexuals have natural tendencies toward pedophilia. Religion Islamic perspective on LGB in Iran. The religious fundamentalism that characterizes the attitude of the Iranian judiciary toward homosexuality is long-standing. To contextualize the strict upholding of such judiciary practices, one must first consider the ideology of the Islamic Republic as it is embodied in its religious and political leaders. Within months of the 1979 Iranian Revolution, the birth date of the Islamic Republic, Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini, then the highest-ranking political and religious authority in the Islamic Republic of Iran and its supreme leader, called for homosexuals to be exterminated. They were to be understood as the parasites and corruptors of the nation who spread the stains of weakness. In view of such theological intolerance, it is unsurprising that social representations of homosexuality remain negative within Muslim communities. Theological opposition can be seen in Islamic Holy Scripture, the Quran, Islamic law, Sharia, and the verbal sayings attributed to Prophet Muhammad, Hadith, all of which hold a very negative view towards homosexuality. Under current Sharia law, homosexuality is considered a had crime, a crime for which the Quran suggests a specific punishment. Proponents of more progressive thinking in Islam say that many had crimes are at odds with another Islamic concept. Tajdeed calls for the reform in Islamic society in order to keep the religion pure. Human rights campaigners report that over 4,000 members of sexual minorities have been executed since the Ayatollahs seized power in 1979. In Iran, the Islamic Revolution in 1979 brought a massive destruction for homosexuals in the country. As Tyler et al. 2015, it is unclear how many non-heterosexual individuals have been executed since the Islamic Revolution, but between 1979 and 1990, some 107 executions were recorded. Religion often plays a pivotal part in the rejection of LGBT in the Islamic society and is the guide dog for the thinking and action of millions of believers. Religion is often on par with core identity amongst Muslims, both heterosexual and LGB alike, and thus the Islamic stance on homosexuality is of prime importance. It is more than a theological guidance. Rather, religion is the underlying essence in the political foundation, as it possesses the moral authority to influence social opinions and behavior, especially in marriage, family life of religion, and education. And nowhere is this more aptly seen when it comes to society's view on homosexuality. Simply put, through the prism of religion, homosexuality is an abomination. Religious beliefs continue to be a reckoning force and a momentous factor in thwarting societal acceptance of homosexuality and same-sex marriage. In Iran, homosexuality is viewed as a sin, whilst transsexual is viewed as a sickness. These harsh social realities often spill over into the lives of LGB-identified Iranians. Trans-identified individuals are not specifically addressed in the Quran, whilst paradoxically, the Iranian government facilitates the sex change operations for transsexuals. In Iran, the Islamic Revolution in 1979 resulted in massive changes via executions and sex change operations for homosexuals. Tyler et al. 2015 comments that it is unclear that how many non-heterosexual individuals have been executed since the Islamic Revolution, but between 1979 and 1990, some 107 executions were recorded. Whilst referencing Najmabadi, Tyler et al. Notes that after Thailand, the Islamic Republic of Iran performs more sex change operations per annum than any other country in the world. The Iranian Penal Code was also reformed. The newly revised Islamic Penal Code was ratified by the Islamic Consultative Assembly in 2009, And in May 2013, the Guardian Council of the Constitution, the upper house of the Iranian parliament, also ratified the new penal code, formerly known as the Islamic Penal Code. The new Islamic Penal Code lists different types of punishments. According to Islamic law, had punishments are considered penalties which concern the legal rights of God. The sentence is set and the court has no room for discretion. In ta'ziyah penalties, the judge has a margin for discretion. The new Islamic Penal Code includes controversial articles, such as the Qisas law of retribution for murder, stoning for adultery, amputations of body parts for theft and certain national security offences, and flogging for a wide range of offences. Similar to the Iranian Islamic Revolution in 1979, the newly enacted Islamic Penal Code directly and indirectly affected the lives of LGBT individuals. Specifically, on the Chapter 2, Articles 232 to 241, it is clear the legal system's preference for heterosexual relationships. LGBT individuals are not wanted and will not be protected. The numerous atrocities being prepared against LGBT in Iran are sanctioned under this new criminal code. Article 233. Lavat is defined as penetration of a man's sex organ, penis, up to the point of circumcision into another male person's anus. Article 234. The had punishment for lavat shall be the death penalty for the insertive/active party if he has committed lavat by using force, coercion, or in cases where he meets the conditions for ihsan. Otherwise, he shall be sentenced to 100 lashes. The had punishment for the receptive/passive party, in any case whether or not he meets the conditions for ihsan, shall be the death penalty. If the insertive/active party is a non-Muslim and the receptive/passive party is a Muslim, the had punishment for the insertive/active party shall be the death penalty. Article 235. Tafkeez is defined as putting a man's sex organ, penis, between the thighs or buttocks of another male person. Article 236. In the case of tafkeez, the had punishment for the active and passive party shall be 100 lashes. Article 237. Homosexual acts of a male person in cases other than lavat and tafkeez, such as kissing or touching as a result of lust, shall be punishable by 31 to 74 lashes of ta'ziyah punishment of the 6th grade. Article 238. Musaheke is defined as where a female person puts her sex organ on the sex organ of another person of the same sex. Article 239. The had punishment for the musaheke shall be 100 lashes. Article 240. Regarding the had punishment for musaheke, there is no difference between the active or passive parties or between Muslims and non-Muslims. Article 241. In the cases of indecent offences, in the absence of admissible legal evidence and the denial from accused, any type of investigation and interrogation in order to discover hidden affairs and things concealed from the public eye shall be prohibited. They cannot entrap people or interrogate them if there is no evidence. As plainly evident, the new Islamic Penal Code criminalizes same-sex relationships with a myriad of punishments ranging from 100 lashes for consensual sexual activity between women, Article 239, to the death penalty for consensual sexual intercourse between men, Article 234. The law also criminalizes other acts between members of the same sex, including touching and intimate kissing, which are punishable up to 74 lashes. Articles 232 and 233 sentence the passive partner of the consensual sexual intercourse between two men to death, whilst the law sentences the active partner to receive 100 lashes as long as he is Muslim and unmarried. Non-Muslims and married men who engage in consensual same-sex relations are subjected to the death penalty. It is interesting to note that the second book of the 4th chapter of the Islamic Penal Code, which covers all forms of sexual crimes, remains ostensibly mute on the subject of rape between married couples. The rape of a minor is a crime only if the sex act takes place outside religiously sanctioned relationships. This twisted logic means that two consenting adult men in an intimate sexual relationship have committed a crime and risk death, while someone who forces sex on a 10-year-old girl in the name of marriage is not considered to have committed a crime. Under the new penal code, homosexuality and the hovering application of the death penalty operate in unity. It is understandable why many LGBT live in a state of constant anxiety and fear, as the Iranian authorities often publicly flaunt its laws and the executions. Heavy punishments for homosexual behavior are still firmly in place. The social climate is hardly conducive to frank discussion of sexual rights. LGB Iranians are left with two options: to live in secrecy or to seek asylum as refugees, leaving their country, their homes, and their families behind them. Iranians LGB and asylum. The consequences of a same-sex relationship deemed a punishable crime or even death in Iran. The negative view of society, the harassment of LGB people by government, and the pressures of family results in a toil that forces many LGB people to seek asylum in countries where the life situation is better. Many of them go to Turkey and receive refugee status from the UNHCR to be resettled in Australia, Canada, or the United States. If they seek asylum in Turkey, these individuals have very limited rights under the Turkish law, including limited access to employment and universal health care, and have no financial means or resources to provide for themselves. The LGBT asylum applicant must show that the LGBT community in their home country is sufficiently visible and that one's treatment amount to persecution on account of their LGB identity or sexual orientation. Many LGB in Iran demonstrate a prima case for claiming asylum. Violation of LGBT rights is a violation of human rights. Homosexuals and bisexuals are under a real fear of persecution and harassment in Iran, and the fact they are in danger of being arrested and punished. Thus, there is a possibility of meeting the legal definition of a well-founded fear of persecution and thus being granted refugee status. Unfortunately, there are some individuals who either exploit or take advantage of this situation and receive refugee status and future residency by falsely discussing themselves as homosexual and bisexuals. This exploitation is not limited to individuals. In the last 2 decades, there have been some NGOs founded by mostly former LGB refugees. These NGOs ostensibly are cooperating with UNHCR, assist Iranian LGB refugees in obtaining refugee status and resettling them in safe countries. But there has also been criticism about their actions in the recent years, and some of them have been accused of corruption and mismanagement of funds and donation.